This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. To think it's been almost half a decade since I covered the original Evil Dead trilogy, after the cancellation of Ash vs. the Evil Dead, which I'm still not entirely over. However, in that video, I didn't really speak much about the 2013 reimagining, instead giving a compressed 3-4 minute rundown of my opinions, thinking I would eventually make an expanded video on its brilliance, which it turns out I never actually got to. So with my excitement for Lee Corrin's Evil Dead Rise, and with Fede Alvarez's remake recently turning 10 years old, there's no better time than to dive back into the demonic iconic shenanigans of the utterly fantastic Evil Dead. Before we get into Fede Alvarez's vividly grotesque reinterpretation of Sam Raimi's 1981 original, I want to address a common criticism within gatekeeping fandom that did not react too kindly to the 2013 film's lack of camp or humour which defined the original trilogy. The reimagining was originally designed to be closer to Raimi's original vision, which at the time was severely limited by a self-funded micro-budget and experience that couldn't authentically capture the full horrific extent of its serious splatter violence. While The Evil Dead is still a frightening and gruesomely fun watch overall, the B-movie charm it became famous for was a residual effect of its amateur production, and despite Raimi jumping back and forth over how intentional it actually was, Evil Dead 2 ultimately became a product of embracing what audiences loved about it, thus defining his unique visual style. It's a perfect example of natural B-movie spirit and campiness that doesn't feel forced, but for the sequel, Raimi and co-producers Bruce Campbell and Rob Tappert, who produced both sequels, seemed adamant on giving the series a fresh spin for modern audiences that rejected the CGI craze that was diluting many horror films at the time, such as The Thing prequel, almost half a year before it. As such, if we're being semantic about faithful adaptations, the 2013 film could not be any more faithful, seeing as it was literally produced under the watchful eye of its creators, with Fede Alvarez making his feature directorial debut being mentored by Sam Raimi himself. In fairness, it's still a little campy in places, but to me, this is exactly what a remake, reinterpretation, reimagining, or whatever the hell you want to call it should be. Like Carpenter's The Thing, Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, and Guadagnino's Suspiria, I love an adaptation that retains the core concept but does its own thing completely, which in Alvarez's version adds some new engaging layers that elevate it beyond a simple splatter flick. Evil Dead wastes no time waterboarding you into its cruel, hopeless world, where the cold opening establishes demonic possession as practically a death sentence, as we're cut off from humanity and devoured by its suffocatingly poisonous atmosphere. Not only does it bluntly set the tone for the physical and psychological torment our protagonists will inevitably go through, but understanding that the only way to rid the world of this wicked evil is to execute the host foreshadows the chance that maybe there might be a solution, a redemption to be found in this grim, unforgiving journey. And well, I mean, there kinda is, but we'll come back to that later. As a general overview, the main story follows a small group of estranged friends who come together to help David's younger sister Mia overcome her heroin addiction by going cold turkey in an isolated cabin that was once used as a family vacation home. However, as luck would have it, that very night, while investigating a rotting smell in a hidden basement, Eric discovers a mysterious book bound in human flesh and containing cryptic ritualistic spells that eventually unleash an ancient evil that possesses Mia.
You are all going to die tonight.
From here, the group fight to survive as the demonic presence attempts to sacrificially kill all 5 of them to resurrect an apocalyptic demon known as the Abomination, which honestly doesn't turn out to be all that abominable, seeing as it's intentionally designed to manifest its appearance around its initial victim for symbolic purposes. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, the overarching subtext many people were quick to point out was how the ordeal thematically mirrors the chaos of battling drug addiction. As a metaphor, it works because it's not explicitly written into the story to the point of unsubtle overindulgence. Instead, it simply gives the story a logical, grounded reason as to why a group of pretty, pampered 20-something-year-olds are willing to stay in a decaying, dilapidated cabin in a swampy forest in the 21st century. That said, it feeds naturally into the premise of Mia's substance abuse effectively bringing down everyone else around her, as it's a problem that manifests beyond the possessed as it infects those just trying to help, sometimes for the worst. It's further extended into the bittersweet relationship between both siblings, as David is revealed to have abandoned Mia to look after her mentally ill mother on her own, who was both institutionalized and I think implied to have suffered dementia before she died, thus mirroring Mia's possession as she's no longer the person they once knew, as she battles the imposter within her while losing touch with reality. It's actually the same metaphor used by The Taking of Deborah Logan, which released the following year, as it deals with a dementia patient becoming increasingly possessed by a demonic presence and losing touch with her humanity and sense of self. In fact, I already made a video on it if you want to hear the finer details on that one. Overall, it's just a very cleverly integrated allegory without any nudge wink wink pretension, as ultimately the focus is still firmly on the stresses and strains they experience at the hands of a cruel, uncaring evil. Even before the possession stuff, I was already feeling the dread, discomfort and instability in Gian Levy's performance, mixed with David and his friends struggling with the uncertainty of their difficult plan. It's also stylistically contextualized into the cabin itself, as it used to be this harmonious safe haven that brought Mia, her friends and family closer together, especially in harsh times, and now it's this rotting relic of the past that's eroded over once happy memories. However, you do have to ignore Alvarez contradicting his own setup in an interview 5 years later, where he explained that the film was a requel where the original events still happened, as implied by Ash's rusted car when introducing Mia. In my head, that was just one of many great homages the film has, but if Alvarez really did intend both films to coexist canonically, it doesn't make much sense unless the cabin was cleared out after Ash's ordeal and nobody noticed. But then you're telling me that in the 30 years since, nobody was tempted by the dormant presence of the book? The assumption is that the book resets itself when defeated, as implied by both the ending and the cold opening, yet how it never became an issue when this group of friends are established to have used the cabin in the past does challenge the logic unless the book was taken from the cabin and made its way back, and you know what, I'm overthinking this. Look, the point is, filmmakers need to stop canonizing details after they've released their films, because it opens a pretty big hole in the timeline when the film doesn't call attention to it. If you're being generous, you can write it off as a nod to the fact that even the original trilogy has a bit of a strange timeline where they essentially rebooted the sequel because they didn't own the rights to the original 1981 film. It's a complicated issue and I explained it in my video on the original trilogy.
What's with all he's coming back to the same cabin with these new people? What? So there's a big debate of is Evil Dead 2 a remake or a sequel? It's a requel.
Anyway, outside that petty tangent, I don't really have any glaring issues from here on out, as the film does many terrific things to twist and turn the chaos that unfolds, but if you can do so, please leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, because it really helps out these videos. And lastly, here are a few words from this video sponsor, ExpressVPN. The worst thing about paying for streaming services is that you never feel like you get what you're paying for, and a big part of that is because of geographical restrictions, where only certain films and television shows can be accessed in your specific country. However, ExpressVPN helps you get the most value out of services like Netflix, Disney+, Paramount+, and Shudder by allowing you to select from a drop-down list of locations to reroute your device to said location, and thus giving you complete access to an entirely new selection of films and television shows. For example, if you live in the US and want to watch this video's topic Evil Dead, Shudder US doesn't have it, but we do have it on Shudder UK, so all you have to do is select a UK location on the ExpressVPN app, refresh Shudder, and in a few moments you'll be diving into the carnage. Conversely, let's say I want to watch Cabin in the Woods. While Netflix UK doesn't have it, Netflix Canada does, so again I select Canada in the app, refresh Netflix, and it's really that simple. Without ExpressVPN, it's like ordering a pizza but all the toppings are off limits, so don't restrict yourself to a basic selection of films when you can easily easily access countless other options worldwide. If getting more value from your subscription sounds like your thing, simply go to expressvpn.com/Ryan to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. Seriously, you'll be shocked at some of the gems other countries have. Now, of course, with the state of YouTube these days, I can't exactly show you all the harrowing stuff in here, like the arm cutting, the tongue cutting, the face cutting, the nail gun crowbar to the hand combination. I mean, you could just go watch the movie, but all you really need to know is that it's utterly grotesque stuff, thanks to the grisly attention to detail of the practical effects that really sell the ugly messiness of the entire conflict. There's a humorously stark contrast to how we're introduced to a hot group of friends surrounded by a setting so apparently out of place for them, because it adds to the eventual mockery they're faced with when all their Hollywood photogenic looks get defaced in unimaginable ways. What kicks off proceedings is when Mia goes through the paranoid effects of withdrawal, calling attention to a rotting smell beneath the cabin that's discovered to be cats, strung up as part of the opening scene's ritual, where Eric returns with a book known in the original as the Necronomicon Ex Mortis that's now renamed Naturam de Monto. It is a striking introduction to the book, as it exudes an immense wicked presence, firstly in how it's wrapped up like a body bag and tightly bound in barbed wire, as if to prevent anyone from ever opening it, and then in the sheer menace of its human flesh dust jacket, followed by sinister markings within, begging the reader to leave the book be. Before we ever learn that the book cannot be destroyed, there is so much richness contained within its presentation to imply what you want about the number of times it's been handled in the past, and of course, no surprise, despite the warnings, the ball bag reads it anyway. To be honest, I'm actually less shocked by the fact Eric chose to read it aloud, and more so by the fact he fucking nailed the translation immediately, causing the demon to be unleashed and targeting Mia during her attempt to escape the cabin while suffering aggressive withdrawal. I like how the demon initially has the motive to escape the confines of the cabin and reach civilization by firstly trying to emotionally manipulate David to take Mia home, to which he refuses, leading to the demon forcing Mia to scorch herself in the shower to convince David he needs to get her to a hospital. It brilliantly sets up the demon as capable of switching between physical and psychological violence to get what it wants, and when it ultimately finds itself trapped with the group, it simply switches tactics to completing its apocalyptic ritual within the cabin. I get people might prefer the nihilism of the original, where the evil seems to exist purely to bully, torment, and play with their victims as minions from hell, so to speak, but the idea of unleashing an even more unpleasant evil adds a fierce urgency to the story. The fact that the demon's first target to kill is the group's qualified nurse Olivia is a malicious choice, because they suddenly lose their most capable character, resulting in trusty old duct tape to the rescue. Olivia's death is substantial because she's basically set up as the initial leader of the group, whereas David is too distracted by his own guilt to take charge. The thing is, it's actually a similar trait given to Ash in the original, where he's more of a subdued supporting character compared to the more commanding and charismatic personalities he's with. It's easy to forget that his heroism doesn't emerge until it's practically forced upon him as the sole survivor. Until then, Ash is understandably a coward, which is a far cry from the wise ass he became in the sequels. In the case of David, it's only when Eric tells him that he has to destroy the bodies of his friend, girlfriend, and his own sister in order to stop the evil, which even then they admit is just a guess judging from the cryptic imagery of the book, does he have no choice but to accept his hero archetype. However, with that said, the 2013 film still continues to defy his heroism by making him tragically struggle with the task at hand. Interestingly, David was originally supposed to be a reimagining of Ash, but Bruce Campbell refused to let go of the character. Yet, it works better to avoid the comparison because ultimately, there's more tension to having lesser expectations for an original character compared to a significant icon like Ash. It's a very smart choice because it puts you in the mindset of people who watched the original long before Ash became an iconic character. There's still a very strong chance he isn't going to make it out of this alive, and well, that's where the 2013 film diverts away from the original ending. Brace yourself. I love the callback to earlier in the film where they discuss how Mia was once declared legally dead for a brief time during an overdose, and so when trying to dispose of the bodies, David thinks that by briefly killing Mia and reviving her, he's found a clever loophole in the curse since the only way to end it is through death. I originally expected him to be wrong about this given how the original film ends with the evil never going away, but I really appreciate the fact he turns out to be right about this. It sets up a somewhat happy resolution where, upon restraining Mia and burying her alive, David manages to bring her back to life and feels a sense of relief that he's essentially redeemed himself for the emotional pain he caused his sister by abandoning her to look after their mentally ill mother. Or rather, he dies thinking that he did, because to rub salt in the wound in a way only Evil Dead can do, I totally forgot Eric could still be possessed after he dies saving David in the basement. It's a pretty diabolical move after all the stress and misery we've been through, but it's so devilishly fitting and ties the whole story together by having David try to protect Mia one last time by locking himself and the demon in the cabin and setting it alight, only to be possessed before he burns to death, thus triggering the abomination to arise now that 5 sacrifices have occurred. Now, you probably saw this coming, but I can't actually show you anything that precedes this because it's quite literally raining demonetization, but hey, all you need to know is that it's a gratifying confrontation with a brutal homage to Ash losing his hand and wielding his gigantic chainsaw through the mouth of evil. Wait, that didn't come out right. Like I said earlier, I'll admit the abomination is underwhelming because its appearance doesn't live up to the expectations it sets and is more of an embodiment of Mia, thus serving the allegory of battling and overcoming addiction, but it's still nice that the movie manages to have a bittersweet ending by allowing Mia to make it out alive while retaining the unending power of the book as it seemingly resets itself, and of course, you can't go wrong with a cheeky wee post-credit groovy from the king himself.
Groovy.
There is an extended post-credits version that implies Mia is possibly still possessed, but without the change of color in her eyes to confirm as such, but it's better to just ignore its existence because it doesn't feel right after the ending they went with. And that is Evil Dead 2013. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, please leave your thoughts in the comments below if you have any, and until next time, stay safe, stay away from the Book of the Dead, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.
Bye.